What's going on, Colts Nation? I appreciate you joining me for another video where today I want to talk about something I heard from Chris Ballard. He was on the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi and somebody else who I can't pronounce his name. I'm not going to try. I don't want to botch it. But Chris Ballard had an interview. It was about a half hour overall and just over a half hour. And there was some good stuff that was said in it. I think a lot, you could take a lot from it. I thought he was a lot more candid and open about some things that he had previously kind of kept in a little bit, right? Not trying to put information out there. So I think he kind of kept some close to home. So for me, starting out in this conversation, we're going to kind of just go through same order. I was taking notes throughout the conversation. So at the beginning of this conversation, he was asked about the reason for bringing back all of his own guys instead of outside free agents. And in my opinion, like to me, he generalized his approach, right? He was talking about how the people that were available compared to the people that are on the team, like there's not a big enough gap for him to go out and spend the money on somebody else, right? And brought up continuity being a reason that he would bring these guys back, right? That's a big part and something that they've talked a lot about. A lot of people, basically everybody on the team, all the coaches, Chris Ballard, they've all talked about continuity. And he was talking about, right, practice habits and how people practice, the work ethic of people, knowing each other personally and already knowing each other and each other's families and having those relationships, building those relationships, and how relationships are such a big part of being able to build a successful team. And like that part I understand, and I'm completely with him there. I actually agree with him on that. In my opinion, I'd be hard pressed to say that Quandre Diggs and Justin Simmons aren't pretty big upgrades for what we know we have at free safety. Now, I am very public about the fact that I think Nick Cross is going to be really good. But I'd be crazy to say, hey, let's not bring in Quandre Diggs. We know what Diggs is. We know what Simmons is. They're a clear upgrade on what we have. So it'll be interesting as we continue to go forward. Will anything happen on that front? There was more said in this conversation that I don't know if that's the way we're going to go, right? Chris Ballard kind of talking about his overall approach later in the video or later in that conversation. We'll talk about that later in this video. But the next thing that comes up is something we hear from Ballard a lot. He talked about winning in the trenches when it matters most late in the season and how he's going to die on that hill. And he made a pretty good point for it, right? Talking about how you have to be deep in order, and you're going to, as the season goes on, you're going to need more guys to be able to rush the passer. And that's when Michael Lombardi chipped in and he brought up the potential of what's on the team and how it looks if everyone plays the way they're capable of, right? From Jonathan Taylor was somebody brought up specifically, right? Anthony Richardson obviously is in there, AD Mitchell, Josh Downs, all the guys, right? If the team plays to their potential, right, there's so much that they're capable of. And the first thing that Ballard talks about, like right off rip, says, I have to give credit to Coach Steichen, and starts talking about Coach and talks about how he doesn't complain about what he has to work with. Last year, the Colts had so many major injuries, right? We had a good amount of injuries, right, starting in training camp. Ashton Doolin, Danny Pinter, even though he's not a starter, he's the depth piece, right? We lost a lot of people in training camp, Jelani Woods. So when you think about the injuries, JT obviously misses the beginning of the year, some games in the middle of the year, so many injuries. And with that, you still end up in a situation where we win 9 games and almost get to the playoffs. And, the way some of those games went, we should have won the Browns game, right? Tyler Goodson catches that ball if that's a better pass. And Tyler Goodson ends up catching that ball. Colts probably end up winning the division and go to the playoffs as an 11-win team, right? It's the small things that matter. So going into this year with our talent level, you got to think we're going to be set up to win. And it's because of Coach, which again is what Ballard is talking about here. And he doesn't complain about what he has. He's able to win with what he has. He compares him to Andy Reid in the fact that the way he's able to find how a team can win and be able to exploit how a team can win week in, week out. He's going to get the most out of his guys. Being compared to Andy Reid is great. And Ballard knows Andy Reid. He worked with Andy Reid in Kansas City. Ballard was part of the staff that drafted Patrick Mahomes. So Ballard, Ballard knows what it's like being around a great coach. And the fact that, he's comparing Shane Steichen to him, I think is indicative of something else that they ended up talking about later on in this conversation. So we're actually going to skip up a little bit here. We'll come back to something they talked about, but he was asked about AR and how they knew he was the guy. Like, why was he the guy that they wanted all along? And he talks about how Coach has a great adaptability as he's gone on in his career, from Phillip Rivers to Justin Herbert to Jalen Hurts to Gardner Minshew to Anthony Richardson, and how when you look at all those, right, go back in history and look at Shane Steichen, his record with all these guys and the stats with all these guys lead very productive offenses. All these guys are able to win football games. So when you look at, like, even Gardner Minshew, right? Like, Gardner was up and down. He only ended up with like 17 touchdowns by the end of it. But he was still had like 3,500 yards, right? Like, he found a way to be productive. The Colts won 9 games. So when you're really looking at it as we go forward, again, talking about Coach, this continues to come back to Coach and how great he is, that adaptability and being able to help Anthony Richardson be great, right? Bringing the best out of Anthony Richardson, just like he is bringing the best out of the entire team, right? And then that's when Chris Ballard goes in to talk about AR, who he was asked about originally, and talks about AR has the poise, right? You think about Anthony Richardson and his poise. Has Aaron Donald breathing down on him in the pocket, wrapped up on him in the pocket, still throws it 40 yards to Alec Pierce, like a freak athlete, and the poise to just sit there. He knows he's going to take the hits. He knows he can take the hits, and he yacked that ball in the air, and it comes out, right? His poise in the pocket, and talks about how, Anthony Richardson is a passer who can run, and people are going to see that in time. That's something going into last season. That's something that I tried to echo to people. Like, Anthony Richardson can run, but when you watch him pass the ball, like, he is a passing quarterback. Dude can pass the ball with the best of them. Of course, he can throw it far, and he's got to work on some passing issues, right? You got to get better at the short to intermediate accuracy issues that he came into the league with. As long as he can get that down, he's going to be one of the best passers in the league. And that's something that Chris Ballard went ahead, echoed in this conversation. I thought it was good that he ended up bringing that up. Okay, then to continue on with this conversation, what's Chris Ballard talking about here? And when asked about the thought of why they drafted Latu, he talked about depth, right? And we kind of talked about the defensive line earlier. Lombardi went on to agree with this notion and ended up mentioning that the 49ers would probably have 2 more Super Bowl rings if it wasn't for their defensive line being so gassed in the fourth quarter, right? So we have Ballard, who already picked up the 5th-year option for Kwity Paye. That tells me, right, Kwity Paye definitely going to be on the team all year this year, definitely going to be on the team next year, because he wants to see how this defensive line can do later in the season with the depth that they have, right? Being able to split reps. You don't need to have a rookie like Latu come in, even though he can be a guy that carries it for that defensive line and gets 15 sacks in his rookie year. They're not going to let him be that guy because they don't want him. By the time this team makes the playoffs, assuming they will, right, they don't want Latu to be completely gassed and not be able to give them the production that he's truly able to. So, with what's being built, I like it, right? Talking about building in the trenches, I think that's a good way to build a team. You can't win if you're not good in the trenches. I'm fully on board with that. That's why I love Latu coming in and everything that he's going to be able to bring. And this is another guy, right? Anthony Richardson on the offensive side. If he stays on the field, offense has limitless potential. If Latu stays healthy on the defensive side of the ball, this defense has limitless potential. That's what we're talking about in the last 2 drafts. Those are the kinds of guys that we've drafted in the first round. So really like the way the team's being built, like what Chris Ballard's talking about here. I like the things that he's saying. Like, he could just be doing coach talk, right? A lot of what he talks to in most media circuits that I've seen him, it's a lot of coach talk. But I like the way with another former GM, Michael Lombardi, somebody with some Super Bowl rings, he's not out here BSing. And Chris Ballard is I feel like more candid in this interview, which I enjoyed, like giving a little bit more in depth on kind of his thought process overall on a lot of things. And one of those things is the new kickoff rule and how the team might handle the new kickoff rule with what's going on. And something I've mentioned and something I've talked about on this channel is, how's it going to work? Are you going to have big guys on both sides of the ball? Is it going to be skilled guys on both sides of the ball? Is one side going to want, like if you're the returning team, this is the way I thought of it. If you're the returning team, do you want big guys in there because that's what they do, they block, and those, they're so close together, would that work out? You can have some big old blockers in there, right? The way Chris Ballard made it sound is that you don't want to have big guys in there because they can't hold their blocks as long, right? Running down the field and be able to hold their blocks, which is going to cause holding calls. So the idea and what it sounds like in something that was mentioned before of, if it's not a bunch of linemen, hey, maybe we see a bunch of tight ends line up on the field for the Colts. And from all sounds of it, that's probably what it's going to end up being. The Colts have a bunch of tight ends on the roster. Sounds like we could go into the year with a bunch of tight ends on the roster because of the new kickoff rules. We also have a bunch of safeties on the team. You think about how deep we are at safety, even going all the way down to Marcel Dabo, the international player that the Colts have, not taking up a roster spot. Like, it'll be interesting to see what the construction of the roster is with the new rule. I think we can keep all the tight ends because they can play. They're going to want them on special teams, right? And a lot of our guys are already, better as run blockers now as they were, when they came into the league. So, we'll see what happens. He does expect teams at some point, it's going to get to a point, probably teams just take the kickoff or take the touchback, give teams the extra 5 yards, right? Instead of the 25 like it has been, teams are going to get it at the 30. Chris Ballard thinks at some point teams will end up getting to that play, and that's what it's going to be. But then the last thing to talk about here is when he was asked about the possible massive quarterback contract and how he's planning for it. And this is what he had to say about it.
I mean, for me, the one thing you never overplay a great player. You just don't. I don't care what anybody says. Like, and a quarterback, if you know he's a great player, I promise you, whatever you pay him, he's going to play great and it's going to be worth it. I think one of the hardest things in terms of making that evaluation is you've got one and he's a good player, but he's not a special player, and he's wanting special player money.
All right, so that right there, you can take a lot from what Chris Ballard said right there. Like, his approach to paying his guys and to paying free agents is simple when you really look at it. Like, when you break it all down, if you're a special player, you get special money. If you're a great player, you get great money, and so on and so forth, right? If you're a good player, you get good money, and on. So for Chris Ballard, like, this says a lot about how fans get so enraged about what he does and doesn't go after free agents. And it's because of people thinking they are going to get special money and they want special money, demand special money, but they're not a special player. So Chris Ballard's not going to pay him that. So that's what makes the Quandre Diggs thing, Justin Simmons thing, what kind of money are they looking for, right? I think those guys at this point in their career, are they special? I don't know. I think they're definitely great players still, in my opinion, but maybe they're looking for special money. I don't know what that situation is. If I was an NFL GM, and I think a lot of us, if we were NFL GMs, we would be more impulsive than Chris Ballard. But Chris Ballard, like, when it comes to the draft, free agency, his own guys, outside free agents, whatever the case is, Chris Ballard, the way he likes to build the team, Chris Ballard is going to do what Chris Ballard is going to do. Okay, that's very evident, and he's shown that he's willing to build the team in a certain way, right? You got Josh Downs last year. He gets A.D. Mitchell this year, right? Gets Latu in the first round. We got Anthony Richardson last year. Like, the way he's able to build the team with what he has, I think he does a great job. I think the way he goes about it is going to continue to frustrate us. I still want that safety on the team, but I still believe that Chris Ballard and his guys do a good job of drafting, so I'll trust it as we go forward. We'll see what happens as we go forward. There's still plenty of time until training camp. Maybe something happens and we get one of these guys, You never know what's going to happen, right? Plenty of veterans looking for teams out there. And of course, these guys being older are going to want to go to teams that have a chance to win. Do they think the Colts are one of those teams? Maybe. Do Ballard and his guys want to bring in a guy? Who knows? There is no real information on that right now. Of course, if anything happens on that front, I'll let you guys know as soon as possible. But going forward, I do want to get more into tape. We still need to do Alec Pierce. I'm going to continue to do Madden content. Played my first game yesterday. I'm going to put that video together for you guys and have that out at some point in the near future. So make sure you subscribe with notifications on. Got a lot of stuff coming up. So make sure you get notified for it. And of course, I appreciate you stopping by for another video. As always, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and go Colts.